Have you ever walked past an old church late at night? The kind with tall, stained glass windows that glimmer faintly in the moonlight, its doors locked, yet you feel as though someone or something was watching you from inside? Or perhaps you wander through a cemetery, where the names on the stones have been worn away by centuries, and the silence seems heavier than death itself. In those moments, your heartbeat quickens, your breath catches, and the thought crosses your mind. What if the dead are not resting as peacefully as we believe? Old churches and graveyards have always carried an air of mystery. They stand as monuments of history, faith, and remembrance, but they are also the perfect stage for ghostly encounters. Within their cracked walls and beneath their moss-covered stones linger stories of betrayal, tragedy, and restless spirits. Tonight, we step into the shadowed world, where whispers echo in empty chapels and unseen footsteps follow you through the graves. These are the haunting tales from old churches and cemeteries, and once you enter, you may never see these places the same way again. The first time you step into an ancient church, the air feels different. It is not just the smell of aged wood or the coolness of stone that has stood for centuries. It is something deeper, something that presses against your skin, as if the walls themselves remember everything that ever happened inside. Churches are sacred places, built to inspire devotion, to provide sanctuary, to offer peace. Yet when the candles burn low and the pews are empty, those same places often become stages for unsettling encounters. The silence inside an old chapel is not simply silence. It is layered with centuries of whispered prayers, grief-stricken cries, and vows spoken in secret. And sometimes, if you listen closely enough, you might hear echoes of voices that do not belong to the living. One reason churches are such magnets for ghostly tales is the sheer weight of history they carry. Many of these structures have stood for hundreds of years, some even 1,000, surviving wars, plagues, fires, and human despair. Within their walls, people have been baptized, married, and buried. Kings have been crowned, heretics condemned, and the sick left die in desperate hope of divine mercy. With such a concentration of human emotion, joy, sorrow, fear, and faith, it is little wonder that people believe a residue remains. In folklore, intense energy often leaves an imprint on a place, a kind of spiritual scar that cannot be erased by time. And when that place is as symbolically charged as a church, the scar often feels alive. Take, for instance, the crypts beneath many cathedrals. Descending into those chambers, you enter a world where the dead lie only a few steps below the altar. The stone passages are narrow, damp, and dimly lit, and the rows of ancient tombs line the walls like silent witnesses. Some visitors report feeling watched as they walk through, their footsteps echoing unnaturally, as though someone else were following just out of sight. Others claim they hear faint chanting, long after the choir has gone home. In one particularly famous tale, a priest in the 18th century swore that while performing evening prayers alone, he saw a line of shadowy figures kneeling in the pews. When he looked closer, he recognized the faces of monks who had been buried there centuries earlier. What makes such accounts compelling is that they do not always come from thrill seekers or superstitious villagers. Sometimes they are recorded by clergy themselves, men and women devoted to faith, trained to doubt illusions and resist hysteria. Their stories carry a weight that cannot be dismissed so easily. Could it be that churches, built as houses of God, also serve as crossroads where the living and the dead briefly meet? Another reason for the eeriness of churches lies in their architecture. Gothic cathedrals, with their towering arches, grotesque gargoyles, and dimly lit corners, were designed to inspire awe and humility. Yet the same features that elevate the soul by day can unsettle the mind by night. A shaft of moonlight cutting through stained glass can turn saints into watchful figures with eyes that seem to follow you. A draft through the bell tower can sound like a whispered warning, and the echo of your footsteps across stone tiles can mimic another set of steps that are not yours. But the stories go beyond mere tricks of the imagination. In some villages, the church itself is believed to be cursed or haunted. One legend from Eastern Europe tells of a chapel where every priest who served mysteriously died within a year of taking the post. Locals whispered that a murder had once taken place at the altar, and the restless soul of the victim demanded retribution. Travelers who dared to step inside after dark spoke of hearing the bells toll at midnight, though no one pulled the ropes. What is most chilling, however, is how universal such tales are. From the foggy countryside of England to the sun-scorched towns of Italy, from remote monasteries in Tibet to abandoned missions in South America, the pattern repeats. Old churches harbor strange phenomena. Doors open on their own. Candles relight themselves. Choir music drifts through the air when no choir is present. Whether one sees these as signs of lingering spirits, echoes of the past, or simple psychological effects, the fact remains, these places unsettle even the bravest hearts. And perhaps that is the key. Churches stand as thresholds, not just between earth and heaven, but between the known and the unknown. When you walk through their doors, you step into a place where countless lives have intersected with eternity. You stand where the grieving begged for miracles, where the condemned cried out for mercy, where generations face their deepest fears of death in the afterlife. If ghosts exist anywhere, would it not be here, in these sanctuaries of human hope and despair? As you sit in the pews of an old church, imagine the centuries that have passed before you. Imagine the plague victims carried in on stretchers, the soldiers kneeling before battle, the mothers clutching their infants for baptism. Imagine the confessions whispered in secret, some never forgiven, their sins still lingering like smoke in the rafters. With every creak of the wood and every flicker of the candlelight, you are not just sitting in a building, you are sharing space with an ocean of invisible history. And sometimes, history refuses to stay silent. When people speak of haunted places, their minds often drift to lonely castles, crumbling mansions, or fog-filled graveyards. Yet some of the most famous ghost stories in the world are tied to churches, holy sanctuaries that paradoxically seem to attract unholy presences. These stories persist not because they are rare, but because they repeat across continents and centuries. They remind us that no matter how sacred a place may be, it is still a vessel of human memory. And where there is memory, there can also be unrest. Perhaps the most chilling of these tales comes from St. Nicholas Church in Pluckley, England, often dubbed the most haunted village in the country. The churchyard is said to be home to the spirit of a screaming man, believed to be a soldier who took his own life. At night, villagers have reported hearing his agonized cries echoing across the gravestones. Inside the church itself, the apparition of a lady in red is said to appear. According to legend, she was buried inside 7 coffins and a stone sarcophagus, yet her spirit still wanders, searching endlessly for peace. Even the most skeptical visitors admit to a strange heaviness in the air when stepping into the church after dusk, as if the building itself were holding its breath. Moving northward, we find St. Mary's Church in Bungay, Suffolk, linked to one of England's most terrifying folklore creatures, the Black Shuck. In 1577, during a violent storm, villagers gathered in the church to pray. Suddenly, a massive black dog with flaming eyes is said to burst through the doors, tearing down the aisle and attacking worshippers. Historical accounts claim that 2 parishioners were killed instantly, while others bore scorch marks on their skin, as if struck by lightning. To this day, claw marks are still visible on the church door, evidence, some say, of the beast's presence. Whether one believes the story or not, the sight of those ancient marks sends a shiver down the spine of anyone who touches them. Across the channel in France lies Notre Dame de Paris, a cathedral famous for its beauty, but also steeped in whispers of the uncanny. During its long history, caretakers and priests have spoken of hearing footsteps pacing across the upper galleries at night when no one is there. Some believe the spirit belongs to a medieval alchemist who made a pact with dark forces to help design the cathedral's intricate architecture. His restless soul, they say, still lingers in stone, forever tied to the Gothic marvel he helped bring to life. Visitors often describe a sense of being observed from the shadows of the towers, as if the gargoyles themselves were alive. In Spain, the Cathedral of Toledo is not only one of the country's grandest churches, but also one of its most haunted. A tale from the 14th century speaks of a young woman who fell in love with a priest, a forbidden romance that ended in betrayal and tragedy. Her ghost, draped in white, is said to glide to the cloisters, her face hidden by a veil. Those who see her claim that she appears suddenly, then vanishes just as quickly, leaving behind a faint scent of roses. The locals call her La Dama Blanca, the White Lady of Toledo, and believe she appears to warn others against repeating her doomed choices. Even in the New World, churches bear their share of eerie legends. In Mexico, the ex-convento del Desierto de los Leones, a monastery built deep within the forest outside Mexico City, has long been associated with strange happenings. Visitors have reported chanting in empty chapels, phantom monks walking the corridors, and even sudden drops in temperature so extreme that breath becomes visible in the middle of summer. Some say the monks practice secret rituals within its walls, leaving behind energies that still linger. The isolation of the convent only adds to its chilling aura, making it one of the country's most unsettling spiritual landmarks. The United States, too, holds stories of churches haunted by tragedy. One of the most famous is St. Louis Cathedral in New Orleans, where whispers of the supernatural are as common as jazz music. The cathedral, built in the 1700s, is said to be haunted by Père Antoine, a Capuchin friar whose spirit is seen wandering the aisles in his brown robes. Locals insist that during candlelit services, his figure sometimes appears near the altar, silently watching over the congregation. Yet his presence is not considered malevolent. Rather, many see him as a guardian spirit who continues to serve his parish centuries after death. But not all church hauntings are gentle. In Eastern Europe, particularly in abandoned chapels scattered across Romania and Slovakia, stories speak of churches where the dead rise during certain nights of the year. Villagers claim to hear bells ringing by themselves at midnight, followed by the sound of a congregation murmuring in unison. Those who dared appear inside swore they saw pews filled with pale, ghostly figures attending a mass conducted by a priest with no face. Scholars dismiss such stories as local superstition, yet the fear they inspire is undeniable. Even hardened travelers hesitate to approach these ruins after dark. What ties all these tales together is a sense that churches, though built for the living, belong equally to the dead. Their walls carry centuries of devotion, but also centuries of grief, betrayal, and violence. Wars were fought outside their doors. Executions sometimes took place in their courtyards. Priests and monks were buried beneath their floors, their bones lying just below where congregations still kneel to pray. With so many layers of human history packed into a single space, it is not surprising that people believe some part of that history refuses to fade. Skeptics argue that all these stories can be explained by natural causes. Drafts that slam doors, echoes that sound like whispers, candlelight that flickers in unsettling ways. Yet, even the most rational visitor cannot deny the power of these settings. A ruined castle may feel abandoned, but a church never does. Even when empty, it feels occupied by memories if not by spirits. Perhaps that is why ghost stories from churches endure. They reflect the uneasy truth that the sacred and the haunted are not opposites, but two sides of the same coin. If churches are the sanctuaries of the living, cemeteries are the kingdoms of the dead. They spread across hillsides, lie hidden in forests, and sit quietly beside village roads, filled with names etched into stone, some remembered and some long forgotten. Cemeteries are places of mourning and remembrance, but they are also places where silence seems heavier, where shadows stretch unnaturally, and where time itself feels unsteady. To walk through an old graveyard is to step into a realm where history sleeps, but not always peacefully. The eeriness of cemeteries begins with their purpose. They are not just resting places for bodies. They are landscapes built to confront us with mortality. The headstones, mausoleums, and crypts are markers of finality, yet they also seem to whisper stories. Some bear elaborate carvings of angels or weeping figures, while others are so weathered that their inscriptions have been erased by centuries of rain. Standing among them, one realizes that every grave was once a life, and every life carries emotions too powerful to vanish completely. It is here, amid moss-covered stones and tangled weeds, that countless tales of ghostly encounters take root. One of the most famous haunted cemeteries in the world is Highgate Cemetery in London, a sprawling Victorian necropolis. It is both breathtaking and terrifying, with winding paths, ivy-covered tombs, and crypts that resemble entrances to the underworld. During the 1970s, the cemetery gained notoriety for sightings of what came to be known as the Highgate Vampire. Witnesses described a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes that stalked the grounds at night. Others reported animals found dead under mysterious circumstances, their bodies drained of blood. While skeptics dismissed it as hysteria, the panic grew so intense that self-proclaimed vampire hunters broke into the cemetery at night, opening coffins in search of the creature. To this day, visitors describe an oppressive energy in certain parts of Highgate, as if the graves themselves are watching. In the United States, St. Louis Cemetery No. 1 in New Orleans is legendary for its spectral residents. The most famous spirit said to wander there is Marie Laveau, the city's voodoo queen. Even in death, she is believed to wield supernatural influence. Visitors leave offerings on her tomb, coins, candles, even written pleas, hoping to gain her favor. Many claim that if you knock 3 times on her tomb and ask for help, strange things will happen. Illnesses improve, fortunes change, or problems mysteriously resolve. Yet those who disrespect her resting place often report nightmares, sudden misfortune, or the sense of being followed by an unseen presence. For locals, Marie Laveau has never truly left New Orleans. She simply walks a thin line between this world and the next. In Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, Scotland, another spirit is said to torment visitors to this day, the notorious Mackenzie poltergeist. Sir George Mackenzie, known for his brutal persecution of Covenanters in the 17th century, was buried in the cemetery after his death. Since the 1990s, countless visitors have reported scratches, bruises, and sudden fainting near his mausoleum. Paranormal investigators have declared Greyfriars one of the most active sites in the world, and Mackenzie poltergeist is often described as a spirit not of sorrow, but of rage. Even seasoned ghost hunters approach the site with caution, knowing that the energy within those walls is unpredictable and, at times, violent. Not all cemetery hauntings are tied to infamous figures. Many are born from anonymous grief. In Resurrection Cemetery in Illinois, a ghostly woman in a white dress, known as Resurrection Mary, has become one of America's most famous vanishing hitchhiker stories. For nearly a century, drivers passing the cemetery at night have picked up a young woman who asks for a ride. She speaks little, gives vague directions, and then, without warning, disappears from the car when it passes the cemetery gates. Dozens of witnesses, from taxi drivers to police officers, have reported encounters with Mary, each describing her as pale, silent, and impossibly real. Her story embodies the sorrow of cemeteries, the longing of a soul not ready to let go of the road she once walked. The power of cemeteries lies not just in their ghostly legends, but in their symbolism. Gravestones are designed to be permanent, yet time erases them. Mausoleums are built to preserve families, yet they crumble. Crosses, angels, and skull carvings all serve as reminders of mortality. For centuries, people believed cemeteries were liminal spaces, gateways between worlds. In some traditions, it was thought that spirits lingered close to their graves, watching over loved ones or waiting for judgment. Others saw cemeteries as dangerous places where restless souls wandered if they had been wronged in life or denied proper burial rites. The combination of death, ritual, and memory makes these grounds fertile soil for ghost stories. But what makes cemetery tales particularly chilling is the intimacy of the encounter. Unlike haunted castles or abandoned houses, cemeteries do not belong to the past alone. They remain active. Families still visit, still mourn, still leave flowers. To encounter a ghost here is not just to meet a stranger from another era. It is to be reminded that grief does not die, and love does not end, even when the body rests in the ground. And so, when the sun dips below the horizon and the shadows lengthen among the stones, cemeteries transform. The wind through the trees becomes a whisper. The crunch of gravel underfoot becomes footsteps not your own. A sudden chill across your skin makes you wonder if the dead are brushing past you. Rational or not, such feelings linger. For in cemeteries, the line between memory and presence is dangerously thin. To walk through one at night is to gamble with silence, to ask yourself whether the shadows hold only air, or whether they hold the forgotten souls of those who once lived, who now refuse to let the world forget them. For centuries, stories of haunted churches and cemeteries have captured our imagination. They thrive because they speak to something deeply human. Our fear of death, our hope for meaning, and our fascination with what might wait for us beyond the grave. Yet the most unsettling tales are not just about places or legends. They are about encounters. Moments when the living claim to come face to face with something that should not exist. Moments when the veil between worlds feels dangerously thin. One such story comes from a small chapel in rural Ireland. For generations, locals spoke of a figure that appeared during midnight mass. A tall man dressed in black, his face obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. Parishioners whispered that he always sat in the same pew, never speaking, never moving, until the moment the final hymn ended. Then, as the congregation turned to leave, the figure would vanish, leaving behind a smell of damp earth. When the chapel was eventually renovated, workers uncovered a hidden grave beneath the pew where the figure was always seen. No name was inscribed on the coffin, only a date from the early 1600s. Was the figure a restless soul, forever tied to the place where his body had been concealed? Or was he a reminder that even holy ground cannot erase secrets? Another chilling account comes from a cemetery in Eastern Europe, where grave diggers reported hearing cries beneath the soil. Terrified, they unearthed one of the coffins only to find claw marks on the inside of the lid. The villagers believed the spirit of the person, buried alive by mistake, still wandered the cemetery in search of justice. Visitors who walked the grounds at night spoke of hearing muffled sobs rising from the earth, as if the soil itself remembered the horror. Skeptics dismissed the claims as superstition, yet the legend became so powerful that families began placing bells above graves, connected by strings to the coffins, just in case their loved ones had been buried before their time. But not all encounters are violent or terrifying. Some carry an eerie tenderness. In a church in Italy, a priest once claimed to have seen an elderly woman sitting quietly in the front pew during evening prayers. He thought little of it until he realized she had been buried in the churchyard a week before. When he looked again, the pew was empty. He later told his congregation that he believed she had returned not to haunt, but to pray one last time in the place she loved most. Stories like these remind us that not all spirits are restless because of anger or pain. Some may linger simply because love ties them too strongly to leave. Modern technology has only added to these mysteries. Paranormal investigators have recorded unexplained voices in abandoned chapels, shadows on cameras that move against the light, and sudden spikes in temperature in graveyards where no breeze stirs. Some of the most unsettling recordings come from ghost hunters who ask direct questions inside old churches and receive faint but distinct answers. Skeptics argue it is interference, echoes, or tricks of sound. Believers insist it is proof that we are not alone. Why do these tales endure? Because they force us to confront the unknown. Every religion, every culture, every civilization has stories about the dead lingering among the living. Churches and cemeteries, as places tied to both worship and burial, become natural settings for such beliefs. Even the most rational among us cannot deny the feeling of unease when walking through a graveyard at night or stepping into a darkened chapel alone. These places remind us of mortality, and with mortality comes mystery. And yet, perhaps the greatest lesson these stories offer is not fear but perspective. They suggest that life leaves traces, that joy, grief, love, and loss do not vanish simply because a body rests in the ground. They remind us that the past is never truly gone, that the walls of a church or the soil of a graveyard hold more than stone and bone. They hold memory. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, you cannot deny the weight of those memories pressing against you when you stand in such places. So the next time you pass an old church with its crooked bell tower or wander through a cemetery where the names have faded to illegibility, pause for a moment. Listen closely. Do you hear only the wind or something more? Do you feel only the chill of the night air or the brush of a presence beside you? You may tell yourself it is imagination, but imagination has a strange way of pulling truths from the shadows. As we close these haunting tales, the choice is yours. You can dismiss them as legends, inventions of fearful minds, stories designed to thrill and entertain. Or you can consider the possibility that the world is not as empty as it seems, that the dead sometimes linger in the places they loved, the places they feared, the places they could not leave behind. One thing is certain, whether through faith, folklore, or personal experience, the pull of these places is undeniable. They beckon us with mystery. They unsettle us with silence, and they remind us of the fragility of life. So tonight, as you lie in your bed and the house grows quiet, remember this. Somewhere in a forgotten church or a cemetery bathed in moonlight, the past is still alive. The question is, would you dare to step into the shadows and see for yourself?